Hi, I'm Ollie Malley, and this is part of our Zen and the Art of Homeschooling series about collaborative homeschooling. And today I have two friends with me, very good friends, Gary and Suzanne, and we're going to talk about how we've done science since like 2007 or 8. We've been doing science together and in a collaborative way with multi-aged group of kids. We started, they were the oldest kids were in middle elementary school, and the youngest kids were babies. And we are still doing science to this day together. So, Suzanne, why don't you start with just at the beginnings when we started doing science 12 or 13 years ago, and how that looked and how it's progressed through the years.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start. We started with a science group when I started homeschooling my oldest son. And and we had maybe about 6 kids. It was at the suggestion of a friend of mine that I have some science experiences that I would have at my house because that's my background, is a science background. And I was happy to do that, especially because my oldest, who I was homeschooling at that time, really liked science. So I was willing to put time into that because he was enthusiastic about it and he naturally gravitated towards stuff. So it just made sense if I'm getting all this stuff out to get it out for more than just him. So then it also turns out that when you have a group of kids experimenting, demonstrating, doing stuff with materials, it gets a little messy. And so it wasn't like a drop-off event. The parents, at least maybe one or two of them, would often stay. And I think it just evolved from that point into something that was a collaboration. It made sense to have more than just one of the homeschool parents do it. So we often had one parent leading it, maybe for that day or maybe for that couple month period. But then all the other parents or most of the other parents would pitch in and help. So that's how we got started, and I think that's how it became collaborative. It's somewhat out of necessity. And then we just had fun, and so we kept it going.
I think I remember the first time we did like sink. Was it sink or float? Was that the first one, or is that just one? I just remember that one so clearly. Sink and float, and so you had like water tubs set up, and so we had so we had elementary school age, preschool age, and then kind of babies all there together, and kids just exploring that. Would think, will it sink or will it float? And getting wet, and just having fun with that. So how did you decide like what kind of lessons to do, Suzanne?
That has evolved over the years. I think in the beginning, it was probably somewhat random. Like I would find an interesting demonstration or experiment or something and then get interested in doing it and try it out. Honestly, my oldest, Aaron, he likes science so much, and he loved just reading through science books, like some various like library books that would talk about experiments or demonstrations that you could do. So he would bring them to me a lot of times. I also found a science educator who I really liked, named Priscilla Spears. And so I read through her stuff and I would get excited about trying out her stuff. So sometimes I would sort of do kind of maybe a mini theme for a few weeks. I remember early on, I did some earth and space science, and one of the fun ones was making a meteor out of, I think it was sand and dry ice, and it was just this big mishmash of stuff. And I remember having that out in my driveway with some, I think they were third and fourth graders who were out there. So that was a fun one. And I got that experiment from Priscilla Spears. So as we went on, and especially as the children became a little bit older, it made a little bit more sense to stay on a theme. So we would often ask the families and the kids involved like what they were interested in, and so then we try to stay on that theme for a while. So some examples of that would be prairies and flowers. So I remember early on that was one theme that we did. We got outside to Whetstone Prairie week after week, and even did some drawing of the wildflowers in the prairie, and maybe talked about plant families. So it was just sort of a plant and botany and wildflowers sort of theme for a few months. Maybe another time we would do simple machines, and we would, for a couple months, talk about levers and screws and all the various simple machines and play around with that. As the kids became even older, I settled into a pattern of choosing a theme that wasn't just like a science topic in the traditional sense. So like early on, we might do physics for a while, we might do chemistry for a while, we might do some biology. Oh, biology. We did a like an exchange. What was that called? The forest project. Do you remember the name of that, either of you?
Forest Box, I think.
Forest Box. So we signed up to partner with another group. This group was from a school, and we spent actually months learning and gathering things to put in a box that we then mailed to this other group, and then they mailed a box to us. So it was this exchange with a group from far away. And that was a lot of fun. So that was one of them early on. But I was starting to say later on, the different students in the group had different amounts of experience with science. So some of them had read widely and deeply on science, and some of them had had less experience and had focused on some other stuff while homeschooling. And so I found that it made sense to come at things from a more interdisciplinary approach, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So we did the chemistry of cooking one year, would be one good example. So we talked all about the chemical reactions that were happening as we made food. We talked about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and did that in the context of eating and food and, acids and bases. I think we made muffins and talked about leaveners and baking soda and baking powder and what those were and what happens if you add lemon juice or buttermilk. So we did that, and I think that was helpful because those students who had never done much chemistry could get an introduction to it, and those students who had learned a lot of chemistry already could see it in a new light, see it in a new, from a new perspective, and so deepen their knowledge of it. So that's how it morphed, I guess. And I guess the last thing I want to say about that topic of how did we choose topics, it was really curiosity driven. I mean, sometimes it was just, we see this really fun thing we want to do and somebody wants to do it. Or one parent, I remember, one parent may have some more time to do something for a few months, and this is just their personal interest. I mean, we've had parents lead sessions on beekeeping and bees. We've had botany and naturalists. We've had all different kinds of things that were interesting to those adults who could lead something.
Mm-hmm. So Gary, why don't you talk a little bit about your experience?
Sure. I guess I remember the first time Suzanne and I met when we joined the science club. It was really profound for me because basically she had an idea that, well, we've got this year, we've got a whole bunch of time. What do we want to do with it? There's just so many things we can tackle with that, and like she said, there were several different themes, and I think the first year the theme was the forest box, but then also the tree of life was another part of that, and coming from a science background too, I was thinking more about a lot of the science, and she was thinking more about, well, how do we connect this with the kids, and what kind of activities can we do where they really start to see these things? And um, I just remember the Tree of Life um, activity as being just amazing because they drew this giant tree of life with all the branches, and just in doing that, they got exposed to the huge diversity of life. And then they took pictures of each of the groups and put them on the tree of life, and then they could hang that up in their house. And the project itself took, I think, a few, maybe a month to do. Um, and I remember that tree of life hanging in some people's houses for a couple of years. it's, it's great. And I learned a lot at the same time because there were a lot of, I come from a biology background, but the groups that I studied were, a small subset of this huge thing, so it was a great learning experience for me too. It was a lot of fun. And like Suzanne said, there were times where we, um, like one parent would step in. My background is ecology, and so I took a couple of months, I think 1 year, to do some ecology activities with the kids, and um, it was a lot of fun. And I, I can remember one case where we were just talking about population growth, and uh, the idea was to engage all the kids through a bunch of different ages. So we had some very young elementary school kids, and I think even seniors in high school, and trying to connect those kids with one activity can be kind of challenging. So we came up with this activity where the older kids would actually calculate some things, the population growth for every generation, where the younger kids would just model it with grains of rice. And so it was like rabbits on an island. And you start with 2 rabbits, and the next generation you have 4, and then 8, and it keeps growing and growing. And the I just remember the high school kids going, "Oh, these numbers are getting kind of big," and the elementary school kids going, "This is crazy! There's so much rice on this island." It was a lot of fun. Um, so just little things like that, or activities like that. I mean, I think I just read about that activity from on the web, and it was a way to bring it to our kids.
I remember that activity, Gary, and more importantly, my now senior in high school remembers that activity so well. And that is such a great example of something that we did really years ago. And I I just love how hands-on it was. I love the fact that you were able to engage the older kids and the younger kids. And then I think after we did the rice, didn't you have them run around and pretend to be rabbits? Weren't there like a predator and a prey, like role play or something, Gary?
Yeah, I think that was part of it. Now that you mention it, it's been a lot of years, so I'm not sure. And the whole idea there, I think, was just to demonstrate to them the idea of natural selection. Like if certain animals have some special characteristic, they might have a different kind of growth trajectory. Anyway, that it was all about getting them running around and seeing what the results were of their interactions, and that was a lot of fun too.
So in the moment, it seemed like, okay, and we did this at a metro park, by the way. So in the moment, it was a lot about getting them running around, getting them engaged, having them be outside. And that was great. And I think it was all so much fun that honestly, some of the kids thought, not like at the end of that day, but like as they started approaching high school, like, oh, not really sure how much they learned. And I had the great joy of being the high school biology teacher for a couple of those kids who, I mean, when we were doing the high school biology, we'd open up the text and, you know, I'd get to that predator prey. And they were like, oh, yeah, we totally get this. Yeah, it was like when we were running around and we were rabbits. And I mean, they could remember way more of it than I could. They could remember specifically who were the rabbits and who died. And I mean, it was so memorable for them that when I gave them just maybe a tiny bit more language that was a little bit more precise for high school level, or when I, you know, maybe we quantified a little more than they had when they were younger, they already had the concept. So that was just so fun to see years later how much that stuck. And I just want to really emphasize that point, because I think a lot of time what drove our decisions about what to, like, I don't know, study, if you will, or what activities to do were just really what activities are really compelling that, you know, have a basis in some kind of scientific concept or some idea in science, but what are the activities that are going to be the most compelling and memorable? And I think, at least I'll speak for myself, that was a driving, like, that drove my decision. Like, that just looks like a cool activity and it sounds memorable and fun.
And speaking of a cool activity, I remember another Metro Park time when we were talking about the parts of a flower, and Suzanne, you had come up with all these things from around the house to model um, the different parts, the stamen, the pistil, all the different things, and included like a Swiffer and a bunch of different things, and then I believe there was an activity to get the pollinators involved too, and see how the actual pollen grains moved and all that kind of stuff. And just to have it made so uh, explicit was so great. And I think um, I I had a lot of fun. I think the kids had a lot of fun too, and I think that they'll remember those kind of things for a long time.
On that point, the science activities, sometimes they're demonstrations, you know, think of things like baking soda and vinegar mixing together and you see what happens. Um, Not too often did we really do experiments with like the full experimental method where people did hypotheses. We, you know, talked about it, certainly. We did a little bit, but a lot of it was just observation. And then some of it, like the one that you were just talking about, Gary, was just making models. And I really am so convinced of the importance of making models in science to understand it. And I really like making models that are surprising or wildly different in scale. So like gigantic. I think that's was part of the fun of the Swiffer, right? Like, and I think they were ping pong balls with Velcro on them to represent the pollen, or did we use little warm fuzzies? I don't remember exactly, but it's so much, it's so wildly bigger than the stamen and a pistil and the pollen of a flower that it makes you think about it differently. So models are really compelling, surprisingly compelling.
And it's so different than in a classroom where you have one teacher and 25 plus kids. We would have a couple teachers and a couple parents, and the kids outnumbered us, that's for sure. But the student teacher ratio was a lot smaller, and helps keep kids engaged. Plus, we were doing very engaging things, and I want to talk a little bit about, we did a lot outside, which you guys are mentioning. So I don't even, that was just part of it. Even if we were at somebody's house, a lot of times we're outside, maybe from necessity because it was messy and we would do things outside. But we were very intentional about getting to parks, and a lot of times just being there at a park. And that was just part of it, just being in nature and being outside. So I want you guys to maybe talk a little bit about that intentionality of getting outside, especially because people now, if they're going to be homeschooling and collaboratively homeschooling, outside is probably the safest place to be if you're going to be with different families, not going into each other's homes. And you might choose to do that too, but just depending, outside might be a good option for people. So, if you guys could speak about that intentionality of getting outside and yeah, it wasn't all focused outside, that's for sure.
I think that we did try to do a lot of the activities outside. Sometimes it was hard because here in Ohio it can be cold, um, and so sometimes we were pushed inside even though we wanted to be outside. But one thing that we did do is there were times where we didn't necessarily have anything planned, and we just went outside and went for a hike, and um, and that was actually a great time because it was an opportunity for the kids to experience nature, experience different. We tried to go to a bunch of different kinds of places, and do it in a social situation where they could interact and they could be they could be comfortable, and it. I thought that even those times where we didn't have anything planned and went outside were were pretty positive, and it was a real relief to be able to say, there's too much going on. Let's just go outside, and that was still a positive thing.
Yeah, I think we planned like 1 week a month. Is that about it? That we were going to be at a metro park at least 1 week a month, for doing some kind of activity or for unstructured activity. And I know we've done it through so many years that each year has kind of changed. And I know maybe one year we were even outside even more.
I think it just has depended on what was going on with our families and the outside. One of the pulls to go outside is just the kids. Like they just enjoyed being outside. And that's the way I remember it, is that for most of the time we had we probably, our most often pattern was we would meet once a week, but about 3 times a month. And that 2 of those might be planned with some activities, whether that be inside or outside. And that one of them was not really any structure or plan or agenda necessarily from the parents. It was just getting to a park, being outside, maybe noticing stuff that we notice, birds or flowers or trees, but also maybe just running around outside with friends. And that was so valuable, even without the plan. So that's, I think, encouraging. And as you said, Gary, sometimes even the other ones where we thought we were going to plan something structured and then life got a little crazy, we would say, forget it, let's just go outside and have a hike today. And that was great. So it took the pressure off.
Yeah, I mean, I know as being a classroom teacher, each year when I taught, I used to take my classroom to camp, and we would do a 4-day, 3-night camping trip. And that was one of the most wonderful times of my year. And just realizing those kids that struggled in a classroom, those kids that were ADHD or on medication, they did not need their medication for that time that we were outside. They had so much fun. They were learning. They were engaged. We didn't have behavior problems. And one of that is we had a lot more helpers when I was at camp. It wasn't just me. There were the camp staff that were there, and so it was more like a 5 or 7 to 1 ratio of kids to teachers. But just being outside and the excitement, and it was amazing. So that's kind of the opportunity people have if they're homeschooling or now. That just getting kids outside, it does something to their brain. It does something to all of us to be outside. Wakes us up, makes us alive. I mean, touching the earth is just so essential. And a lot of times in school, you're in that classroom. It's hard to stay focused so long. So even just getting outside, not just for science, but during your day, making sure the kids are getting outside. Even if you're doing some more online work, it's even more important to be going outside. Yeah, and the flexibility this gives, and I know you guys kind of were talking about this, of doing science, like when kids are engaged, you kind of run with that, but you can see when kids stop being so engaged, it's okay. And we've done this many times just to in the science class early or in whatever class you're doing early and just let there be some playtime. And you can kind of sense what's going on in kids. And so that flexibility has been really important over the years.
I guess I'd like to offer a challenge to people to think about how something that might happen indoors could happen outdoors. So one example I'm thinking of is when we're doing some physics and talking about motion, talking about speed, like velocity. We took bikes, I think, to Whetstone Park and time stopwatches, and we timed people biking a certain distance, and we did graphs that plotted their distance over time and then calculated velocity. I think with the older kids, we even talked about vectors. And maybe that's a topic that honestly, before I was pushed, I mean, I've evolved so much throughout doing all this collaborative homeschooling, and a lot of it is from the kids' preferences. And so I know that 10 years ago, I probably would have thought to do something like that inside with like little cars or something. And as I've evolved, more ideas have come, more possibilities have opened in terms of actually you can do a lot of what you would do inside small. You can do it outside and bigger.
Right. Well, and one of the things is you don't always have to be comfortable. We mentioned we're in Ohio and it gets cold. And we would plan these things where we're going to go outside and it may be 40 degrees or 35 degrees. And we'd still, it would push us because we said we're going to be outside, that we would go outside, and we even brought lunches. And I remember eating outside in like a 40-degree, not sunny day in Ohio and thinking, I would not have gotten myself outside, let alone my kids outside on a day like this. But we had planned this to happen. And everybody was dressed properly, so no one was cold. You're fine. I mean, one of our friends, she said that I love this. There's not bad weather. There's just bad dressing. As long as you were prepared and dressed well, you can handle many different types of weather. And we've had a lot of fun. And that's happened again and again and again. That we pushed ourselves to be outside just because we made a commitment that we're going to get together. And there's no way my individual family, I could have got my kids outside if it wouldn't have been, we're going to go meet some people at a park.
And it wasn't suffering. I mean, we had a lot of fun being outside in some sort of miserable, what would be otherwise miserable weather, but with friends, it was fun.
I remember just speaking of the cold, I remember one time we were talking about, it was really cold. It was like in the it wasn't sub-zero, but I think it was around like 5 degrees or something outside, and Science Club was at my house. And we just decided we were going to measure the temperatures of microclimates around my yard. And so I think the parents were a little bit like, it's really cold out there, really cold. But we all bundled up and kids were measuring temperatures like in a compost pile and right on a rock. And they just saw a huge thing. We didn't stay out for very long because it was really cold, but it was fun to do that. And just little things like that can kind of bring home and make a point to kids, I think, in a concrete way. One other outside activity that sticks in my mind and that's when we were working with plants. We were over at a friend's house that had a field near their house, and we had the kids wear socks and walk through the field and collect seeds that way, so that we could then examine the different kinds of ways that seeds might get transferred around. And it was fun for the kids, I think, to be able to walk outside in their socks and then they learned something about the seeds that were in the burrs and all those things that were collected on the socks. That's just one thing that stuck in my mind.
Yeah, fall is such a wonderful time to be outside. And this is going back not to our science club, but back to my high school experience. One of my most memorable and favorite things I did in biology in high school was a leaf collection. That our biology teacher made he told us you wouldn't pass if you didn't do a leaf collection. Everybody did a leaf collection, and it was so wonderful. I probably can go in my basement and find that leaf collection I did. It made such an impact on me. But there's so many. Fall is a great time to be outside.
I'd like to add that I like to read about science education, and one of the things that I've been reading lately is that there are a lot of people, even maybe who are, say, majoring in biology in college, who don't have familiarity with, say, the birds, backyard birds, or the trees around. And that's a real problem, just the fact that people don't know their familiar, flora and fauna around them. And so I think sometimes we maybe devalue or like don't give enough credit to learning that type of stuff. So that's a lot of what we learn when we're just going on hikes. We're becoming familiar with the flora and fauna around us, whether we're conscious of doing that or not. We're just getting to know those things around us, those beings around us. And I think at the end of a hike that you just went outside and you didn't really intend to learn anything, that it's easy at the end of that day to say, oh, I don't really know if much school happened today. And you had to go find all your snow pants or rainwear or whatever it was. It's kind of a big investment, honestly. And I just see, looking over the long haul of years of doing that, I really see how much benefit there is to all those little moments. And then two more points on that. One is Gary talked about how we really made a commitment to go to various metro parks. And the metro parks, I mean, we are so lucky. We have such great resources in Columbus. And not only do we have the spaces, but we also have naturalists who are willing to meet with us, and all kinds of great resources and programs. So we really tried to go to a lot of different places, whether they were farms or metro parks or public city parks. But we also did at least one year, we had something where we went the complete opposite way. We went to the same place every couple weeks for a several month period. And that was really interesting. We chose to do that in the spring when the spring wildflowers were coming out. So I think we did it probably from, I don't know, earlier mid-March to May, I want to say, maybe every 2 weeks. Probably went 5 or 6 times to that same spot. And it was just such an experience to see how the same location changed over time. And I know I learned so much about what is in a forest in the spring. Like, you can't even see the remnants or the leaves of sometimes of the plants that flowered beautifully in March. So that was great. So that's the opposite strategy, is just go to the same place. And it could be the same place that's pretty close to you. And then my last point on that is I've been having fun lately with the apps that help identify the plants, trees, insects, all kinds of stuff around. And so I'm using iNaturalist. I know there are other ones. Maybe my son uses Seek. I don't know. I would have to check the name of that. But I know there are multiple apps out there. And so I'm really probably not telling anyone anything new. But I would really encourage you to use a phone with an app on it and point it. It's amazing what you can learn. I feel like I'm really becoming a better naturalist with that information at my fingertips, because I really, right in that moment, I can make a good identification. And it's not all about identifying, but sometimes that really makes it fun.
It's nice to be able to name things. I mean, I think that does help appreciate nature. I mean, through these years of us taking all these walks, and many people in our circle are naturalists, and I've learned so much. And it really, I don't know, it helps me to appreciate it a little bit more.
One other activity that we did that was a lot of fun that I think would be kind of perfect for socially distanced or physically distanced times like now is we did a scale model of the solar system. So I think when I was in school, we did a model of the solar system. So we had the planets and we, had them in order, and maybe we even made them out of styrofoam, or I don't know if it was painted paper. But when I started looking into how much space would there be between planets if you used the same scale for how big the planet was, I was pretty surprised. So we ended up with a giant piece of paper. Honestly, someone had some paper, big paper that they were getting rid of. So that might have even been the inspiration for the activity. Sometimes the activity inspirations were just like, what material did we have on hand that we wanted to use? I don't remember. But anyway, we had this, a big sun. I don't even think we could cut out the entire sun, but we cut like, the curve that would be proper for the sun of the right diameter, and then painted it like a sun and pasted it up on my garage. And then we tried to find scale models using household objects. So I think we might have used like a tomato from our garden, maybe an acorn, a bead, things like that to model the various planets, and then keep the same scale for how big was the planet and how far away was it from either the sun or the next planet. And spoiler, like you're not going to be able to do the whole solar system on your property. And in fact, if you get into this, I would encourage you to do it yourself first, but then you could look up some videos on YouTube that show some other people who've done it. There's some college students who posted a video about making an actual scale model. It was a lot of fun. And can I just say about the math on that particular project, I distinctly remember, we were trying to divide up the tasks, and it was one person's job to maybe do some painting and another person's job to do the calculations to figure out how far with this scale the planets were going to be. And it was a fun surprise to see that the girl who was doing the calculations really wanted to keep doing calculations. That was the plum job, not the painting. So it made math really meaningful. So we learned beyond this, beyond learning about the solar system, we were learning math skills of scale and practicing things like multiplication, but for a purpose.
Right, and yeah, I mean, it's as a teacher, what we talk about this whole language, this whole like a unit learning where you learn about all different kinds of things. So through science, you can learn math and writing and reading, and they get a history. And we did that in these science classes, that we would bring in the full curriculum to them, and not so even though there's a science focus, it really goes way beyond science. Cooking that's another thing, and art. And kids have different strengths and different interests, and so bringing that in there, physical activity, all those things can be brought into science. Well, thanks for joining us and hearing a little bit about what we've done in science, and we sure hope that you can be inspired by this and know that you don't have to work out of a textbook or a certain curriculum. Part of science is just getting kids excited about science and knowing that science is everywhere. And science is looking at the birds or watching the flowers grow. Yeah, science is cooking. Science is working with tools. That science encompasses so much of our lives. And just to get them interested and excited, and to work with their excitement and with your excitement, to have fun together learning science. We'll see you again another day.